Hello everyone, this is my next tutorial on The Enemy, written by Pearl Seidenstricker Buck. She was an American writer and novelist. She also had a Chinese name as she spent her childhood in China being the daughter of missionaries. She was awarded Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and the Nobel Prize in 1938. This story is set during the time of Second World War. It highlights how a Japanese doctor saves the life of an American prisoner of war and rises above narrow national prejudices. The author has beautifully portrayed the conflict in the doctor's mind as a private individual and as a citizen with a sense of national loyalty. Remember this clipping from Razi? Now imagine the conflict going on in Alia's mind when she points the gun at her husband Vicky Kaushal. At that moment, she was also torn between her individuality, where she was the wife of Vicky Kaushal, who belonged to Pakistan's police force, and she was the spy from India, wherein came her national loyalty. However, in the movie, Alia sacrifices her individuality for the nation because she was a spy. But when such situation is faced by a doctor, then can you imagine the extent of dilemma? Because doctors always keep humanity first. So it becomes very difficult for them to choose between humanity and national loyalty. And on second thought, before we begin the lesson, I think we should bow our head in gratitude to all the doctors around the world who are working 24/7 to save the humanity from the deadly clutches of COVID-19. The story begins with an introduction of the protagonist, Dr. Sadao Hoki. Dr. Sadao lived in a low-height house made of stone in the coast of Japan. The boundary of his house was lined by pine trees, and as a child, Dr. Sadao enjoyed climbing up these trees. Also, he often accompanied his father to the islands of the South Seas. His father believed that the islands were stepping stones to Japan's future. He also made Sadao aware of the fact that future had no limits. It depended on mankind how it shaped its future. Sadao's father was a serious and traditional man who took infinite pain for his son. He was chiefly concerned about his education, and hence Sadao was sent to America to learn surgery and medicine. Sadao's father inculcated in him values of patriotism and national loyalty in his initial years, and Dr. Sadao always cherished these virtues in his life. The Second World War had already begun, but Sadao was not sent with the troops because he was about to make a discovery which would leave the wounds entirely clean. Another reason behind this was that the general of army was an old man who was treated by Dr. Sadao, and he might require an operation any time. Pertaining to these two reasons, Sadao stayed back. The writer describes the scene outside Dr. Sadao's house. As the days were unusually warm and the sea waves were cold, the nights had become foggy. Before Sadao could go inside, his wife comes out looking for him, wearing a traditional attire. Further, the author describes that Sadao had met Hannah, his wife, in America. He knew that his Orthodox father would marry him to a Japanese girl only, and so he ensured this before falling in love with Hannah. Then there is a talk about an American professor and his wife who were always kind and ready to help foreign students in America. But Dr. Sadao was of the view that their house had small rooms, the food was bad, and Professor's wife was talkative. Thus, it was a coincidence that he agreed to go to Professor's house that night and found Hannah, who was a new student. Dr. Sadao and Hannah had not married in haste in America. Rather, they returned to Japan, sought permission from their parents, and then got married in a traditional Japanese ceremony. They were a perfect, happy couple. Sadao and Hannah were sitting together when they saw something black coming out of the mist. They discovered that it was a man. He walked a few steps unsteadily, and then the mists hid him again. It seemed that a big wave had flung him out to the shore. Both of them leaned over the railing of the veranda to have a closer look and saw the man again. He was seen crawling on his hands and knees, and after some time he fell on his face. Sadao thought that he was a fisherman, washed ashore from his boat. He ran to help, and Hannah followed. This part of the coast was not inhabited, as it had dangerous rocks. So, both of them felt that as the rocks were pointed, the man could have been badly injured. And they were right. The man was bleeding profusely. The sand on which he lay had blood stains, which indicated that the man was wounded. An old cap hung on his head, which was soaked with water. His dress was also wet and torn. On turning man's head, Sadao and his wife realized that he was a white man, an American. As his cap fell off, they saw his long, wet, yellow-colored hair. His face was young, but with marks that indicated that he had been tortured. He had a rough yellow beard too, as he had fainted. He was not aware of Sadao's and Hannah's presence. Sadao moved his trained fingers around the man's back to search for the wound. He felt blood oozing out of a wound in the lower part of his back. It was a gunshot, and the man had got no medical help to treat his wound. Moreover, the sharp rocks on the shore had pierced it badly, and thus it was bleeding. Hannah was concerned about the injuries of the man. By now, mist had engulfed the surrounding, and so the three couldn't be spotted by anyone. Also, the fishermen and beachcombers had left by that time. While Sadao wondered what to do with the white man, his trained hands packed the wound of the man with sea moss. The man moaned with pain but did not awake. Sadao felt that the best thing would be to put the man back into the sea, and Hannah supported his opinion. Sadao told Hannah that if they give shelter to the man, they would be arrested for sheltering an enemy. And if they handed him over to the Japanese army as a prisoner, he would die in the prison. Thus, the best option was to put him back into the sea. But there was something that stopped both of them, and they did not move ahead. Instead, they stared at the motionless figure with dislike as he was an enemy, an American. Hannah was inquisitive about the man's identity. Sadao picked up the torn cap, read the words written on it, and concluded that the man was a sailor from an American warship who had been taken into captivity during the war. Both of them realized that the man had tried to escape from the prison and had been shot in the back. But Sadao and Hannah were not able to gather the courage to throw him back into the sea. Sadao explained his reluctance by stating that if the man was well and healthy, he would hand him over to the police without any hesitation. The man was his enemy as he was an American. But his only concern at the present moment was that the man was wounded, he was injured. Hannah realized that Dr. Sadao won't be able to throw the man into the sea, and she too was reluctant in doing so. Hence, the second option was to carry the man into their house. Sadao was worried, thinking about the reaction of the servants. Hannah planned that they would tell the servants that they intended to hand over the man to the army once he recovered. She was also quite tensed about the future of their children and Sadao's position. If in any case they failed to hand over a prisoner of war to the police or the army, they would land into grave problem. They lifted the injured man into their house. He was very light. The writer here compares his weight to that of a cock or a fowl that has not been fed for a long time, and its body loses flesh and reduces into mere feathers and skeleton. They carried the man to the bedroom that belonged to Sadao's father and had not been used after his death. The injured man was laid on a thick mat on the floor. Everything in that bedroom was Japanese, as Sadao's father disliked using foreign things. Hannah brought out a soft quilt made of silk, but she resisted putting it on as the man was extremely dirty. Sadao opined that the man had to be washed and asked Hannah to get hot water so that he could wash the man. Hannah did not want Sadao to touch the man as he was their enemy, so she said that Yumi, the governess, might wash her. Before leaving the room, Sadao saw the man's face, which had turned pale. He bent down and felt the heartbeats of the man to see if he was alive. Sadao realized that the man's heart was beating and thus concluded that the man was alive. But he seriously commented that if the man was not operated, he would die. He further continued that even if he was operated upon and saved, he would die at the hands of the Japanese army. So either ways, that prisoner or that injured man had to die. Hannah screamed out in fear and advised Sadao not to operate the man and not to save him, otherwise they would land in trouble. On the other hand, Sadao expressed the possibility of the man dying during the operation. But he wondered that the man had a lot of energy which kept him alive through the torture. But then he reasoned out that as the man was very young, maybe just 25 years old, so he had the vitality to face everything, and that is why till now he was alive. Sadao's opinion was that something had to be done with the injured man irrespective of the result. But first he had to be cleaned. As Sadao left the room, Hannah followed him as she didn't want to be left behind with the white man. Hannah turned to the children's room and called out the governess, Yumi. They together laid the beds for kids and proceeded towards the kitchen. She found the other two servants in the kitchen frightened at what Sadao had told them. The governor spoke bluntly to Hannah, stating that Sadao must not treat the injured man. He explained his superstitious belief by stating that first the man was wounded by gun and second time the rocks wounded him. If Sadao tried to heal the man, the gun and the sea will take revenge. Here, the gun represents the Japanese army and the sea represents the country of Japan. So, if they treated the enemy, they would be punished by Japan. Hannah too was frightened, but she was not superstitious like the gardener. She sends Yumi to fetch hot water. Yumi brings in the bucket, places it on the floor, and then firmly declares that she had never washed an American man and she would never wash one as dirty as the injured man lying in front of her. This makes Hannah lose her temper and she orders Yumi to follow her instructions. But the imprinted look of denial on Yumi's face makes her calm down instantly as she bore the fear of the revolt from the servants. Thus, Hannah quickly changed her expression to respect and explained to Yumi that they intended to bring the enemy to his senses and then they would hand him over as a prisoner. Yumi is still not convinced, so Hannah tells her to return back to her work, and this left Hannah alone with the white man who was her enemy. She was so full of anger at the refusal by the maid, Yumi, that without a second thought, she opened the blanket which covered the injured man. Then she dipped a clean towel in steaming hot water and washed his face. The man's skin was rough due to being exposed to the sun, but it had a good texture. Hannah while cleaning him, feels that he must have been very fair in complexion when he was a child. Hannah kept on cleaning the man's upper body, bearing her thoughts in her mind. Then she covered him with a quilt lest he should feel cold. She called out to Sadao softly and saw him entering, carrying his surgeon's emergency bag and wearing his surgeon's coat. He was prepared to operate the injured man. Hannah was not happy with Sadao's decision of operating their enemy, but it seemed that Sadao was firm. He quickly unfolded a sterilized towel open upon the floor of the tokonoma alcove and put his instruments on it to begin his work. He asked Hannah for some towels. She also thought of bringing old pieces of matting so that blood doesn't ruin their flow. But by the time she reached the room, blood had flowed through the bandage on the man's wound and had stained the mat beneath. Then, obeying her husband, she began helping him in cleaning the injured man. She narrated the incident involving Yumi, but Sadao was engrossed in work and didn't seem to listen to Hannah. She realized that Sadao was not bothered about the identity of the injured man. Rather, he was only concerned in performing his work well. Sadao told Hannah that she will have to give anesthetic to the injured man if required. Hannah was all blank because she had never done that earlier. Sadao removed the packing and blood started flowing faster from the injured man's wound. He examined the wound with the bright surgeon's light fixed on his head and declared that the bullet was inside the man's body. He wondered how deep the wound was because if it was not too deep, then he could get the bullet out easily. But then he observed that the bleeding was not from the surface of the skin, which meant that the wound was deep. Hannah had never seen an operation, and so she couldn't control and started vomiting. Sadao couldn't stop in the middle because if he did so, the man would die. So he continued his work but was irritable and impatient with his enemy as he was not able to help Hannah in her distress. Sadao thought that there was no reason for him to make efforts to save the man because there was no reason for him to live. This thought made Sadao merciless for a short time and he started working fast while the injured man moaned in his state of unconsciousness. Later, Hannah entered the room and inquired Sadao for the anesthetic. Her voice was clear, which showed that now she was prepared to help him. He guided her to the bottle of anesthetic and explained her the action to be performed. Hannah crouched close to the face of the sleeping American man. She noticed deep red scars on the neck of their enemy. She wondered if the war torture stories that she had heard were actually true. She recalled newspapers mentioning that the Japanese army was praised and welcomed wherever it went, but she was also reminded about an officer of the Japanese army, General Takema, who was cruel to his wife and would beat her. This made her realize that if a man could be cruel towards his wife, then he could also be cruel towards the prisoners in his captivity. Right at that moment, Sadao had a smile on his face because it seemed that he had found the bullet inside the body of the injured man. He moved his fingers inside the wound as he was familiar with the tiniest part of the human body. His professor of anatomy in America had told them that if a surgeon ignored the knowledge of any part of the human body, it was a sin committed by him. Sadao spoke to the injured man and told him that the bullet had just missed his kidney. It was his habit to talk to his patients while being engrossed in the operation. He addressed the injured man as my friend, forgetting completely that the man was his enemy. Then, quickly, he made a few surgical cuts on the body and removed the bullet. The injured man muttered a few words as he was still in pain and then sank back to silence. Sadao felt his wrist, though hating to touch it. There was still a pulse so faint, but enough to let the man be alive. But Sadao did not want the man to live. He first stopped Hannah from managing anesthetic and then, filling a syringe with the medicine, pushed the vaccine into the man's left arm. He felt his pulse again and finally declared that the injured man would live and not die. The moment the man regained his senses, his eyes were full of fright, realizing where he was. Hannah felt sorry for him. She served him food as the servants refused to enter the room. When Hannah came face to face with the man the first time, she felt that the man was full of fear. Hannah consoled the injured man, and he was astonished to see that she could speak English. Hannah replied that she had lived in America for a long time. She fed him with a spoon and he ate unwillingly. Though Hannah hated the man, but still she would try her best to comfort him. Sadao visited the man on the third day after operation. He found the young man sitting, but his face was pale and weak due to the effort made by him. Sadao ordered him to lie down immediately. He inspected the wound and scolded the man, stating that he could die if he tried to exert himself. The man asked Sadao that would he hand him over to the Japanese army? Sadao did not answer instantly, but then he stated that he himself did not know what he should do with the man. He added that he was supposed to hand him over to the police. He also disclosed that he knew that the man was a prisoner of war. Sadao told the man not to speak and not to tell his name also unless he asked him to do so. After this, they both exchanged glances, and then the man closed his eyes and turned his face towards the wall. Hannah informed Sadao that Yumi had told her that the servants would not stay with them if the American man lived there any longer. They felt that Sadao and Hannah had been in America for such a long time, and so they liked Americans and had forgotten their priority. Sadao expressed his helplessness, stating that the servants couldn't understand that he had been trained in such a way that he could not let a man die, and thus would help to save him in whichever way he could. Days went by and the chores of the house continued, but the servants were vigilant. They remained polite but were unfriendly towards their masters. They did not hide their feelings and discussed the matter in presence of Hannah, as they wanted her to know about their views over the matter. The old gardener, who had served Sadao from his father's time, opined that Sadao was very well aware of what he was supposed to do. When the man was almost dead, Sadao should have left him to bleed to death. Why did he save him? The cook said disrespectfully that their master was so proud of his skill at saving lives that he did not bother whose life he was saving. But Yumi, the governess, was worried about the little ones. She wondered that when these little children grew up, they would be labeled as the children of a traitor. Though Hannah was unhappy with the servants, but she felt that the servants were right. There was something about her feelings and emotions which she could not understand. She hated the prisoner and sometimes through her gestures made it clear that she did not like him. His presence was a threat to Hannah and Sadao, but she could not resist herself from comforting him and feeding him with food. Even Sadao did his duty perfectly. He would examine the wound every day, and finally, one morning, the stitches were removed. Now, it would take only a fortnight for the man to be better. In the meantime, Sadao sat in his office and wrote a letter to the chief of the police to report the entire matter. Sadao began his report by writing that on the 21st of February, an escaped prisoner was washed up on the shore in front of his house. He wrote this much and then kept this unfinished report in the drawer of his desk. Now came the 7th day, and two things happened on this day. The servants of the house left in the morning. Though Hannah was shocked to see that the servants were leaving, but she controlled her emotions and maintained her calm. She paid the servants and thanked them for their services. All the three servants had been working there for past many years. Hence, they cried while leaving the house. But Hannah stayed firm. While leaving, Yumi told her that if the baby missed her at night, Hannah could call her back. Hannah smiled and thanked Yumi for the offer. But back of her mind, she firmly decided that no matter how much the baby cried, she would not call her. Hannah prepared the breakfast and Sadao helped her by looking after the children. Later, Hannah expresses her worry. She inquired that why they did not have the clarity of their action. She felt that the servants were very clear as compared to them. Hannah meant here that as Americans were their enemy, they should not have treated that prisoner of war. Then what made both of them to be kind to the injured man? Meanwhile, Sadao reached the room of the prisoner and spoke bluntly. He said that day the man could get up and stand on his feet only for 5 minutes. The next day he could double the time. Sadao also said that it would be good for everyone if the man regained his strength as soon as possible. Sadao saw that his words brought a hint of terror on the face of the young man. It also appeared that the man wanted to say something more, but he just thanked Sadao for saving his life. Sadao, in a very expressionless way, told the man that he did not thank him so early. Hearing this, the hint of scare returned back into the man's eyes. The writer here compares the terrorized eyes of the injured man to that of a scared animal. Sadao saw the injury mark on the man's neck turning red, but he didn't inquire anything about the scars. Later, in the afternoon, the second thing happened. A messenger wearing the official uniform came to their house, and Hannah, seeing him, was terrified out of her wits. But when the messenger declared that the general was in pain and Sadao was supposed to visit him to treat him, then she took a sigh of relief. Sadao leaves to treat the general and narrates the entire story to the general. The general's first comment was that he understood Sadao's position as he had also studied in America at the Princeton University. But there were only a few Japanese who studied in America. Sadao told the general that he did not care for the American, but as a doctor, he had operated upon him successfully. As Sadao had been successful at operating on the man, the general now felt that Sadao was very skilled, and so he was a necessary part of his life. Then he inquired Sadao if he had any chance of surviving another heart attack like the one he experienced that day. Sadao replied that in his opinion, the general could not survive more than one such attack. The general declared that in that case, he could not allow anything to happen to Sadao. This indirectly meant that he needed Sadao, and so he would protect him. The general's face became expressionless for some time at the thought of Sadao being arrested. He also goes to the extent of thinking that if Sadao was punished with death sentence and he needed an operation the next day, then what would he do? Thus, he realized that he would protect Sadao at any cost and would not let anything happen to him. Continuing the conversation further, Sadao told the general that there were many other surgeons in Japan who could treat him. The general here reveals the fact that he did not trust anyone other than Sadao. He says that the best surgeons had been trained by the Germans, and for them, the operation would be successful even if the general died. The general then makes a statement that the Japanese could not combine the harsh nature of the Germans with the emotional nature of the Americans. If that was possible, Sadao could be harsh and could turn the prisoner to the Japanese army and at the same time be emotional and not murder the general during operation. At this, Sadao states that he was all willing to become a Japanese as desired by the general. The general here shook his head because he did not want to be the body on whom a new trial is made. Once the conversation comes to a close, then suddenly the general becomes serious and felt weak, as he was reminded of the problems he had faced throughout his life while fulfilling his duties and responsibilities in various wars won by Japan. The general then asserts that the best solution was to kill the man quietly. He shares his plan that he would send 2 killers or assassins to Sadao's house at night. Sadao only had to act naturally and keep the door of the outer partition of the man's room open. The partition would give easy access to the killers while the man was asleep. When Sadao agrees to the plan, the general adds that the killers were professional and could kill a person in a way that there would be no noise and the person would bleed inside. He would even ask them to remove the dead body if Sadao wanted. Sadao thought of Hannah for a moment and then readily agreed. On his way back, Sadao thought that as per plan, he would not be involved in the death of the American. He also bore another thought that he would not tell anything to Hannah, as she may not like the idea of hiring assassins. Sadao justified assassins by stating that such people were essential in a place like Japan, as that was the only way for the rulers to deal with their opponents. While going back from the general's place, Sadao did not let any other thought enter his mind. And reaching home, he went straight into the American's room. But he was surprised to see that the man was out of his bed and was getting ready to go into the garden. Sadao was shocked and asked him that who had permitted him to walk. Tom, that was the name of the injured man, was happy and in a jolly mood. So he said that he was not in a habit of taking permission before doing anything. But He mentioned a concern that his muscles on the sides of his body were stiff. Sadao immediately forgot all his plans and thoughts and inspected the scars. Then he declared that massage would work if not exercise. Tom brings in the fact that he was not bothered about scars, but wanted to thank Sadao for all that he had done for him. He further added that if all the Japanese people would have been like Sadao, then the war would not have taken place. Sadao was left speechless. He helped the man to lie down and then bowed in return to the gratitude expressed by the injured man. That night, Sadao was restless. All through the night, he felt that the hired killers or the assassins were there in his house to kill the man. He imagined hearing the sound of footsteps, branches being broken, stones moving as men walked on them. And all these together brought in the anxiety inside him and kept him awake for the night. In the morning, Sadao was the first to get into American's room. He planned that if Tom was gone, then he would tell Hannah that the general had ordered for him to be removed from there. But on opening the door, he heard the sound of his breathing and saw him peacefully sleeping. He closed back the door. Hannah repeated her refrain that what should they do with the man now? Sadao promised her that he would decide in 1 or 2 days. Now came the second night. The second night was windy. Hannah woke up and asked that should they close the partition door of the man's room. Sadao refused, stating that the man was capable to do that himself and didn't move out of his room. The next morning, the American was still there. Now came the third night. On the third night, it was raining and the garden was full of the sound of dripping eaves and running springs. Hannah woke up at the sound of a loud crash and she wanted to go out to check. Sadao stopped her. He was scared and his scare affected Hannah. After some time, there was complete silence and both of them crawled back into the bed with their baby. The next morning, Sadao went to American's room. The American, the injured man or Tom, seemed happy, which indicated that he was recovering well. Instead, Sadao seemed tired as he had not slept for 2 consecutive nights. Finally, Sadao decided that he could not pass one more night in such a way. He was not bothered about the American's life, but he himself could not bear the stress and anxiety any longer. Sadao shared his plan with Tom. He stated that he would arrange a boat, stock it with food and extra clothing, and the man would row it to the nearby island close to the coast. The island was not guarded and was also not inhabited by anyone as it sunk into the sea during the storms. As it was not the season of storms at that time, Tom could live on the island until he spotted a Korean fishing boat pass by. Tom asked Sadao if it was necessary for him to do so. Sadao pleaded him to understand that everyone was aware that he had taken shelter in his house. Realizing the situation, Tom agrees to the plan. Sadao leaves Tom, and during the rest of the day, he becomes busy making arrangements for the American. As it became dark, Sadao pulled a big boat to the shore. He placed food and bottled water in it that he had secretly brought. He also put 2 quilts in the boat. Owing to high tide in the sea, he tied the boat to a pole. It was a dark, moonless night, and Sadao worked without a torch. He did not want to be spotted by anyone. Coming home, Sadao pretended that he had returned from work. Hannah served him evening meal and informed him about Yumi's visit that day. Yumi missed the baby a lot. Sadao only stated that as soon as the American man left, the servants would return. Later in the night, he visited the American. He checked Tom's temperature, the wound, his heart, and heartbeat. Of course, his heartbeat was unsteady owing to the excitement as he was about to leave. Only the scars on his neck were still red as they had not healed yet. Tom told Sadao that he was saving his life once again. Sadao commented that he was sending him because he could not keep him any longer. Sadao was reluctant at first in giving a torchlight to Tom, as one unjudicious use of torch could make him land in trouble. Finally, he gave him his own torch, the one that he used when he had to attend patients at night. Sadao instructed Tom, stating that if his stock of food finished before he found a Korean fishing boat, he could signal 2 flashes of the torch at dusk and not in the dark. If he was all right but still there in the island, he would flash the torch once. He added that fishes will be readily available in the island, but he will have to eat them raw. If he cooked, the fire would be spotted and he could fall in danger. Tom took a deep breath as he was ready. He was now dressed in Japanese clothes. At the last moment, Sadao wrapped a black cloth around his head to hide his golden hair. The American shook hands with Sadao and left. He used the torch to find his way and so flashed once or twice, but that was safe. Sadao waited till he saw the torchlight one more time as the man boarded the boat. Finally, he got rid of his enemy, and that night he slept peacefully. A week before, the general had been operated upon in an emergency in which Sadao also took part. Sadao, without any delay, informed the general that the American injured man had escaped. The general was weak as he was recovering from an operation of his gallbladder. Sadao at that moment did not have the courage to ask him about the assassins. But In his house, things had turned back to normal as the servants had also returned. After 1 week, Sadao felt that the general was well enough that he could discuss about the American man. Sadao declared that the American injured man had escaped. Then he coughed in the middle, which indicated that he had not told everything to the general. The general immediately was reminded of his promise to send the professional killers, and he opened his eyes suddenly when he heard about the American man escaping. He was surprised listening to the news, but said that as he was suffering due to bad health, he had forgotten about the promise. The general felt sorry at this moment for being careless. Then he explained that it was not that he did not love Japan or that he was shirking from his duty, but due to his bad health, he could just not keep his promise. This statement made Sadao realize that the general was in his control, and that meant that Sadao was completely safe. After the conversation, the general closed his eyes and said that Sadao would be rewarded for his goodness. But the reward for Sadao came later in the evening when at dusk he looked towards the island and saw no trace of torchlight. This meant that the American man had found a Korean fishing boat and had gone with it safely back home. Sadao stood in the veranda and recollected the past events. He had flashback of all Americans whom he had met in his life. The dull professor, his silly wife, his teacher, and the untidy landlady. Being a Japanese, Sadao had found an accommodation in America with a great difficulty. He hated living there, knowing that the Japanese were superior to the Americans, but still were treated like inferiors. Finally, he recalls the face of the American prisoner of war and is left wondering that when he had suffered so much from the side of the Americans, why he could not kill his enemy who was an American.